Chapter 10. Jerome had made a pile of sandwiches and had the water for the coffee boiling. He had candy and nuts and oranges in a bowl on the table. While he worked at the stove, he had to keep one eye on the table. The raccoons were sitting around it, looking up at the heaping bowl of sweets. The 7 little skunks had come in shortly after dark. They seemed to know that this was a special occasion. They were busy under the bed looking for mice. There were no night mice left now. The 7 hunters had proved too much for even the old ones. But there was still a mousy smell which kept the hunters poking about. Jerome had just finished counting the sandwiches. He thought 3 apiece would be enough, but he had made 4 extras. He put down the carving knife and turned toward the door. It opened, and a gust of wet wind blew in. Emmylou came in with the gust, red-cheeked and sparkling with rain. Silly was close behind her. Then Job came in, ducking off his dripping hat and mopping the rain from his beard. "Merry Christmas," Emmylou shouted. "I couldn't get away early." Jerome grinned at them. One after another, the 6 Epi boys entered the room, ducking their heads as they always did when they walked through an ordinary doorway. They stood grinning at Jerome, their eyes taking in his odd house. They filled the cabin, and they formed such tight ranks that the startled raccoons could not escape. They did the next best thing. They dashed for their nests and tumbled into them. "Find places to sit down," Jerome said. "My house is a bit small." Each of the boys carried a basket. Silly was so busy looking around the room that she hadn't told the boys what to do with them, so they held the baskets and their dripping hats. "My, it's nice," Silly said. "We came along on account of Emmylou. She's been at us for a week," Job said. "Glad you came," Jerome said. "It's Emmylou's party." "Had to see them trick skunks," Amby said. He was looking around for a place to set his basket. It seemed to be very heavy. Emmylou and Silly took over at once. The baskets were set on the floor near the stove. They got the Epi men and Jerome seated on the bed, the chairs, and the hearth. Jerome caught himself stealing glances at the husky Eppies. They were broad-shouldered as well as tall, and their shocks of hair ranged from blonde to a red as dark as Emmylou's. Amby and Ben were seated on the hearth. Ben nudged Amby and nodded toward the bed. 7 pairs of bright little eyes were peering out at them. "The skunks," Ben said. "Cute little critters." Amby made a clucking sound with his tongue, or like, which was answered by a chorus of churs from under the bed. "I still don't believe they do tricks," Dave said as he began filling his pipe. Dave started something by getting out his pipe. Job looked at Jerome, and when Jerome got out his pipe and passed his tobacco jar to Dave, they all got out pipes, except Ben, who looked at Job sourly. Job grinned at him. "Being this is Christmas, and that I've been a-smelling tobacco on you for a month, you can smoke," Job said. Ben grinned sheepishly. He dug into his pocket and brought out a new pipe. It was a very small pipe. Amby laughed when he saw it. "Pee-wee stuff," he jeered. They lighted up, and soon Silly had to open the door to let the smoke out of the room. She and Emmylou were taking pies and cakes and cookies and cold meat and jars of fruit and preserves from the basket. Jerome's eyes bugged out as they stacked the table high with things to eat. They had brought along enough food to feed him and his animals for a month. He stole a glance at the platter of sandwiches he had made. The pile looked puny beside the huge haunch of roast beef sitting next to it. Amby's basket contained 3-gallon jugs of cider. The raccoons could not keep their heads down inside their boxes with so many good smells filling the room. The noses of the little skunks poked out from under Jerome's bread twitched eagerly. The raccoons and the skunks would have enjoyed the smells a lot more if the air had not been well filled with pipe smoke. When Silly and Emmylou had everything set out, Emmylou lighted the fire in the fireplace. Jerome had left that for her because she liked to start the fire roaring. Ben and Amby had stood up. They were admiring the statue of Old Grouch. "Perfect picture of an old raccoon," Amby said. "Looks just like the tough old customer that licked Ma Grady," Ben said. Emmylou stood up. "It is the same old raccoon. Right now he's asleep under the bed." Then she saw the envelope. "Is it for me?" she asked. "It's for you," Jerome said. Emmylou opened the envelope. "Oh," she said, "it's too much." She had never had $10 of her own in her whole life. Jerome grinned at her. "Thought you'd know best what you'd want." "You can get some nice print dresses," Silly said, "and wear them," she added. "I'm going to get a pair of boots," Emmylou said. "When do we eat?" Enoch asked. They were the first words he had spoken since entering the house. "I thought we'd have some fun first," Emmylou said. "Rather eat first," Amby said. "That's fun." "All right, but you might forget your stomach for one night." Emmylou made a face at her brother. The 7 Eppies tucked away their pipes. They crowded around the table, and Jerome joined them, but he didn't shove right in. There was a lot of pushing and laughing and joking as the men filled their plates. Jerome decided there might not be too much food after all. By the time they'd all filled their plates, the haunch of meat had shrunk into a small roast. His sandwiches were all gone, and one cake had vanished. "While you're eating, I'll have the skunks do their trick," Emmylou said. "If we wait, they'll beg so much stuff they won't act for me." To keep the raccoons out of the act, she set a platter of meat scraps and cake on the floor near the stove. They scurried to it and gathered around, keeping one eye on the Eppies while they ate. The little skunks were getting over their shyness toward the giants who had come into their house. It was their nature not to be really afraid of any animal. The good smells were so strong they just could not stay hidden. Papa stepped out from under the bed and sat up. Emmylou had set out 7 cylinders of baywood. She tapped on one of them with a pencil. Mama trotted out from under the bed. Emmylou tapped some more, and the 5 youngsters scampered out. They ran to the cylinders and perched on them and draped their paws over their furry stomachs. Mama and Papa joined them. As Emmylou moved the pencil back and forth, their heads moved back and forth in unison. When she lowered the pencil to the floor, they all bowed. Then she gave each of them a piece of roast. Instantly, they hopped off their perches and dashed under the bed. "I'll be gall dang," Ben said and slapped his leg. Job's hearty laugh filled the cabin, and the boys joined him. The burst of laughter sent the 7 skunks flying for the door. And there's a picture of the skunks. And I'm going to stop this chapter and do a part 2.